Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Committee on Government Oversight. My name is Nate Libby. I serve as Senate co-chair, and I proudly represent all of the people of Lewiston in the Maine State Senate. We'll continue with introductions of committee members, and I will call on folks, beginning with Representative Stover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everyone. My name is Holly Stover. I am the House co-chair of the Government Oversight Committee, and I represent House District 89, including the towns of Boothbay, Boothbay Harbor, Southport, Edgecombe, Westport Island, and South Bristol.
Thank you. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Donna Bailey, proudly serving the people of Senate District 31, which is Hollis, Leamington, part of Buxton, Saco, and Old Orchard Beach.
Thank you. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Rick Bennett. I have the honor of serving 13 towns, people of 13 towns in Western Maine, inclusive of the Lakes region of Cumberland County, the Oxford Hills area, and Greater Freiburg.
Thank you. Representative Arata.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Arata, and I represent House District 65, which includes New Gloucester and a part of Poland.
Thank you. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Maggie O'Neill, and I represent House District 15, which is in Saco.
Thank you. And Representative Fay.
Thank you, Senator Libby. I'm Jessica Fay. I represent House District 66, which is parts of the towns of Casco, Poland, and Raymond.
Thank you. And we're joined by staff from the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability today. On our screen, we have Lucia Nixon, who's Director of OPEGA, Jen Henderson, who is an analyst with OPEGA. Behind the scenes, we have Sabrina Carey, who's helping to make the electronic meeting happen for us. So welcome to everyone. Our apologies for beginning late. We had some technical difficulties to start, but we seem to have worked through them. For the benefit of the public, this is a busy time of year for the legislature generally. We have a number of our committee members who are attending to other legislative business at the time, ranging from the Appropriations Committee to working on their own individual bills. So we have a number of us who are committed in multiple places at once. It's certainly not for absence is certainly not for lack of interest in our work. I want to just run through some very brief housekeeping items before we get the meeting started. As everyone can tell, this meeting is being streamed online on YouTube. The legislature's audio stream is also available. Just for folks who are participating in this Zoom meeting, please know that anytime your camera and microphone are on, that the world can hear and see what you are up to. So if you do need to take a break, please make sure to turn your microphone off and your video off as well. Written materials for this meeting have been published on the website of OPEGA, and you can find that going to maine.gov. It'll be under the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability under the GOC Meetings tab. If any members of the committee or participants in this Zoom meeting would like to get the attention of the chair, please do so by either raising your physical hand, raising your electronic hand, or you can use the chat function in Zoom to get our attention. Please limit the chat function in Zoom to technical issues or getting the attention of the chairs or staff. The Zoom function should not be used for any substantive discussion. So with that, we'll move to our agenda. The first item we have is introduction of committee members, which I just covered. The second item that we have is a review of the minutes from the last meeting. We don't need to take a vote on any of these, but if members have identified any edits or suggestions, please let us know. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is a presentation on the research expense tax credit. This is an OPEGA report, months in the making. Up first, we'll have Lucia give a brief overview, And then Jen Henderson, Senior Analyst and Project Lead, will walk through a presentation for us. So I'll turn it over to the OPEGA staff.
Thank you, Senator Libby and members of the committee, where we've completed the evaluation of the research expense tax credit. This is also known as the R&D credit. So that term, you might hear that a bunch this afternoon, and we're pleased to release the final report today. This credit is one of the tax expenditures that's categorized for full evaluation under the statutes that govern all the tax expenditure reviews. And so this evaluation is occurring as part of that overall tax expenditure review process. OPEGA tailored its approach to ensure that this report could be delivered during the second regular session so that it could be available to the legislature for consideration relative to LD 308, which proposes to amend the credit. That bill is in the Taxation Committee and has been tabled, and we'll have a work session scheduled for next Tuesday, starting at 11. So we hope that that will be informative to have this report at this time. As Senator Libby noted, Jennifer Henderson and OPEGA led this evaluation project and will be leading the presentation today. She and Carrie Hojara served as the primary staff on the project, and other OPEGA staff provided support and assistance as needed throughout. And with that, I will turn it over to Jen to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Lucia, and good afternoon to all of you. Is it all right if I screen share the presentation with you? Great. And how is that? Can you see the presentation? Nice and large? Excellent. Okay, and we can proceed. As Lucia said, I'm here to talk to you today about OPEGA's evaluation of the research expense tax credit, also known as the R&D credit. And also, as she said, this evaluation was part of the normal tax expenditure review process. And as part of that process, the Government Oversight Committee approves evaluation parameters for each evaluation. And that happened for the evaluation of this credit last May. Those parameters act as the guide for OPEGA's work on the evaluation. And they set out the goals, intended beneficiaries, and performance measures that this credit should be measured against. Those became the focal points of this evaluation. And if anyone's interested in seeing those parameters, those are in Appendix A of the full report, which I believe each of you should have a copy of. Just one other quick thing about the timing and approach on this evaluation. As Lucia said, this was one that the GOC and Taxation Committee had asked us to get to you during this session, so it could be available in the context of LD 308. And additionally, in May, when the GOC approved the evaluation parameters for this review, the committee also approved an approach of using whatever is available for existing data to evaluate the credit to the degree possible. And given that approach and that time frame, and also given the other priorities for OPEGA staff during the months since last May, the work for this evaluation was quite limited. So what we have for you today is a very high level assessment of the credit, and it may not be as in-depth as some of what you've seen in full evaluations of credits in the past. But of course, the Government Oversight Committee can always ask us to follow up with deeper dives on any areas that may be of particular interest. So with that sort of as context, we can move into the evaluation results. Just to give you a sense for where we're headed, we can start with a quick overview of the key takeaways from this high-level review of the R&D credit. What we found for overall conclusions is that while research generally supports the idea that growing innovation does produce economic impacts, the actual impacts of Maine's R&D credit on the state economy are unknown because of a lack of readily available data. In regard to R&D generally, Maine has performed poorly over time compared to other states. even with the R&D credit in place since 1995. We also found that R&D credits are common in states. 70% of states have them, and that they are typically built on the structure of the federal R&D credit, which Maine's credit is as well. And we found that while having an R&D credit in the toolbox of options to support Maine businesses may make sense in light of similar credits in other states, research points to other factors that may be more important in attracting R&D to Maine. We also reported out 3 recommendations around memorializing goals for the R&D credit, around targeting intended beneficiaries, and clarifying data needed for future oversight and evaluation. And we'll cover all of this in more detail as we move through the presentation. A quick roadmap of what's to come. We'll talk first, just a little bit of background, where we'll cover basics about the Maine R&D credit, and a little bit of credit history and context. Then we'll cover the evaluation results before we get to the recommendations. So first, some background on the credit. Even though these are the sort of basics about the credit, it can be pretty complicated. So bear with me if you would while we get through a little bit of this detail, and then we'll come back to the pieces that can continue to be relevant to the other evaluation results and recommendations. The Maine R&D credit is an income tax credit that's available to taxpayers who make certain qualified research expenditures in Maine. So the effect of the credit is to reduce the cost and hence the financial risk of investments in R&D here in the state. MRS is responsible for administering the credit and processes claims for it as part of the normal processing of income tax returns. As far as the eligible expenses for this credit, Maine's credit is built on top of the federal R&D credit. So it uses federal definitions under the Internal Revenue Code, Section 41. However, qualifying expenses for the Maine credit, in addition to meeting those federal definitions, must also be for R&D activities conducted here in Maine only. One other thing is that only incremental expenses qualify for the credit. That is, expenses over and above what the business spent on R&D in prior base years. The credit amount itself is calculated as a sum of 2 parts, 5% of qualified research expenses plus 7.5% of incremental basic research payments. And what exactly can qualify gets complicated really quickly, as we'll talk more about later. But just to give you a sense for each of these buckets, qualified research expenses can include expenses such as wages and supplies associated with conducting R&D, as well as contract costs, while basic research payments are payments to certain educational or research institutions for the conduct of qualifying research. A couple of other details worth keeping in mind about the credit include the fact that it is non-refundable, so it cannot reduce a business's tax to less than 0, and it can be carried over for 15 years. The credit is also subject to limitations for corporate filers. So the limitation is 100% of the first $25,000 of tax due plus 75% of the tax due in excess of $25,000. Like I said, I know that's a lot of detail here right off the bat, but we will come back to these pieces as we move through the rest of the presentation. Some other relevant background, as far as the credit's history, it was enacted in 1995. It has no sunset date in statute. Since enactment, the statute has had only minor technical changes, nothing substantive. However, because Maine's credit is based on federal definitions, any changes to those definitions in the Internal Revenue Code over time will have had a ripple effect on Maine's credit. One other thing to note is that this credit did have a sort of companion credit that is now repealed. That was the super credit for substantially increasing research and development. That credit was enacted in 1997 and repealed in 2014. And we found that it's commonly confused with the R&D credit when we were speaking to stakeholders. The super credit seems to be the one that people have in mind a lot. But just to be clear, the evaluation that OPEGA has conducted and what we're talking about today is focused solely on the regular R&D credit, not the super credit. As Lucia mentioned, at this time, there is a bill before the 130th that proposes changes to the R&D credit. That bill, LD 308, proposes to increase the allowed credit by doubling the percentage of eligible expenses. So from 5% to 10% for the first piece, and from 7.5% to 15% for the second piece. It also proposes to raise limits on the amount of credit that can be claimed. So it would change the limitation from 100% of the first 25,000 to 100% of the first 50,000. And the bill also provides for ongoing funds of $100,000 a year to the Department of Economic and Community Development to advertise and market the credit. As far as other states go, Maine is one of 35 states with similar credits for incremental R&D investment. Most of those credits are built on the federal credit in some way, similar to how Maine's is, although exactly how they're built on the credit varies across states. And most states, like Maine, do not offer refundable credits. Just 8 of the 35 do have a refundable credit. And finally, for background, just a bit about the credit's usage. $18 million in R&D credits were claimed between tax years 2010 and 2019. As you can see from this chart, the total amount of credits claimed has trended upwards over time, but it hasn't always increased year over year. And credits have been claimed by an average of 125 taxpayers per year. Are there any questions about any of the background before we move into the evaluation results?
Other questions from committee members? Jen, I have one question. If you go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
You said about 125 tax filers claim the credit annually. Is that correct?
Yes, on average.
So if a tax filer made an investment, 14 years ago, and they still have some carry forward remaining that they use in the current year, are they considered a tax filer for the current year?
I'll have to double check how that's counted and get back to you on that, Senator Libby.
You understand what I'm getting at?
I do.
Okay.
We're using data that we got here from MRS about the aggregate credits reported. So I'll just have to double check with them about whether they include, how they include that and when people reported the claims.
Great, thank you. We don't see any other hands from committee members. So Jen, please proceed.
All right. So now we'll move into evaluation results. And here we'll talk about 5 key areas that were the focus of OPEGA's work. Those include the credit's structure or design, how well the credit targets the intended beneficiaries, and what we know about how the credit is performing relative to its goals. And for these pieces, when we're talking about the intended beneficiaries and the goals, we're using those as they were identified by the Government Oversight Committee in consultation with the Taxation Committee for the purposes of evaluating this credit. So first off, the credit's structure or design. As we talked about earlier, Maine's R&D credit is built on the federal R&D credit. And building on any federal credit like this can bring some efficiencies around design and administration. because much of the design work is already done at the federal level. So the state can leverage that federal effort rather than having to design a whole new incentive from scratch. There can also be administrative efficiencies for businesses because they can work with one set of program definitions and track their expenses accordingly rather than having to keep track of separate state and federal qualifying expenses. The only difference here is that they have to keep track of were those expenses for research conducted in Maine or not, but the other broader definitions apply to both state and federal. However, building on this particular federal credit also means that we're stuck with a downside of the credit, which is that there are some real complexities in the federal definitions of qualifying expenses. And these complexities make it difficult for businesses to navigate the credit. Since the state uses the same definitions, the complexities affect businesses that use the credit at the state level too, and can be a disincentive to participation. We'll pick this idea up again when we get to the recommendations. One other thing we noted about the credit's design is that the credit currently has no goals, intended beneficiaries, or outcome measures specified in statute. That's another point that we'll come back to when we talk about the recommendations later. And what that meant is that when the Government Oversight Committee was setting out the parameters for this evaluation, those goals and intended beneficiaries and measures had to be identified at that time. They weren't already pre-existing in statute. Next, let's talk about how effectively the R&D credit targets benefits to businesses conducting R&D. When we look at the targeting of a tax incentive, we typically look at it from two angles. The first is, are there design gaps that would allow benefits to go to unintended recipients? And the second is, are there intended recipients who are unable or choosing not to participate? On the first, whether benefits are going to unintended recipients, we found that this credit's design does a good job of targeting the intended recipients, businesses conducting R&D. Businesses can only take the credit if they have expenses from performing or contracting for R&D. And Maine's credit also requires that those R&D expenses be for research conducted in Maine, so that further narrows the target participants to those doing research here in Maine that can benefit our economy. When we looked at the flip side, we found that there may be some opportunities for improvement. And that's when we were looking at whether intended recipients are able to and choosing to participate. We found that some businesses may be excluded from taking the credit or may be unwilling to take the credit, even if they are conducting R&D in Maine. And there are a couple of reasons for this that, again, we'll cover in more detail when we get to recommendation 2. Next, we can talk about the creation of high quality jobs. This was one of the goals that the Government Oversight Committee set for the purposes of this evaluation and that we used in considering the credit. Unfortunately, on this point, there is no data readily available regarding jobs directly connected to R&D credit claims. That means we don't know how many jobs credit recipients may have created, where in Maine those jobs are, or what the wages for those jobs may be. It's also unknown whether credit recipients are spending more on high quality jobs in Maine than they would absent the credit. However, just from looking at the design and some of the evaluations in other states, we found that businesses taking the R&D credit likely are spending on highly skilled research positions. In 2017, Minnesota's Office of the Legislative Auditor did an evaluation of their R&D credit and found that wages accounted for 76% of C corporations' qualified research expenses there. Given that Maine's credit also builds on the same federal definitions of qualifying expenses, we might suspect that a sizable portion of qualifying expenses in Maine could also be wages. And since the state credit requires that qualifying expenses for research must be for research conducted in Maine, we know that any wages included in those qualifying expenses should be for jobs that are conducting research here in the state. And finally, to the point of whether any jobs might be high quality, although the term high quality has not been defined for the R&D credit specifically, the types of jobs considered qualifying expenses under this credit would be likely to be considered high quality by most standards. For example, for state programs such as the Pine Tree Development Zones program, high quality is defined as jobs with wages above the average for the area, which include benefits like health insurance and retirement packages. And jobs associated with qualifying R&D expenses are likely to be highly skilled research scientists undertaking specialized work. And those jobs are likely to meet or exceed quality standards like those in the Pine Tree program. Absent data specific to Maine's R&D credit, OPEGA also looked to data from the National Science Foundation for context about how Maine compares to other states with regard to these sort of highly skilled science jobs. And the National Science Foundation data shows that in 2019, Maine ranked 31st on highly skilled research workforce. That was lower than our neighboring states of New Hampshire and Vermont. What we can't answer is whether Maine might have ranked differently without the credit. Another goal that was specified for this evaluation of the R&D credit was the stimulation of R&D investment in Maine. This was another place, unfortunately, where our evaluation was limited by the lack of readily available data, which is a real theme that we'll discuss in recommendation 3. Because there was no data readily available about R&D investment dollars associated with the credit, we looked again to National Science Foundation data for context. And here we saw that Maine is not performing well in R&D investment generally when compared to other states. In 2018, Maine ranked 47th for total R&D, and you can see a table of Maine's rankings on other R&D measures compared to other states on page 15 of the report, if you're interested in more. Still, given that 35 other states offer R&D credits, Maine's credit may have a role in attracting research investment to Maine. Something that we hear from stakeholders in pretty much every tax expenditure evaluation we conduct is that every little bit of incentive can make a difference when businesses are conducting financial feasibility studies, comparing making their investment in Maine to making their investment in other locations. And this may be one of those little bits that sometimes makes the difference. However, we found that other factors may be even more important with regard to business decisions about where to locate R&D investment. Some examples of factors linked to strong state R&D performance include things like academic, industry, and government R&D funding, broadband infrastructure, and the availability of researchers in university collaborative research settings. The credit here in Maine reduces the cost of R&D, but it doesn't really do anything to address these other factors that may be really important to business decisions. And the final goal that we compared the credit to was the goal of improving the overall economy of the state. And with regard to this goal, we found that it is reasonable to expect that growing R&D in the state should drive economic impacts. This is something that economists have generally come to consensus about. However, the lack of readily available data about R&D investments connected with Maine's R&D credit is a barrier to being able to estimate the economic impacts of the credit itself on Maine's economy. When we look again to the National Science Foundation data for context, we see that Maine ranks poorly on R&D as a percent of GDP when compared to other states. In 2018, Maine ranked 47th. And this is an area that has been flagged for a number of years in the Measures of Growth report prepared by Maine Development Foundation for the Maine Economic Growth Council. And it's an area that was given a red flag again in the Measures of Growth report in 2021. And the report noted that Maine trails badly in R&D investment. Again, it's unclear whether Maine would rank differently absent the R&D credit. However, the credit has been in place since 1995, so one would expect that whatever upward pressure it was going to exert on the state's R&D should have had a chance to materialize by now. And now we can move into recommendations, unless there are any questions at this point. All right, I'm not seeing any, so we'll move on. OPEGA's first recommendation. Oh, I think I may be seeing one.
You are,
Senator Bailey. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to look at the presentation and see the room. Senator Bennett, you have your hand raised.
yes, on that last point, just wondered if you had any further information regarding the, the challenges that the whole tide is rising with respect to focus on R&D across the country. And it has been for the last 25 years. So it's hard to, our relative position may have improved only marginally, but I just wonder what the overall quantum, whether you looked at that as well in absolute terms rather than relative terms in terms of R&D advancement in the state. Is that a clear question? You understand what I'm saying?
If you could restate it, I would.
Yeah,
really
so the last chart showed our relative position, and I think the comment was along the lines of we don't really see much advancement in that chart based at all, and so how much of where we are is due to the credit. I guess the question is, well, that the baseline is moving for the entire chart, and so I was just wondering if you had looked at in absolute terms rather than relative to other states as to how we're doing. Are we doing better with R&D now than we were before the credit or in the early days of the credit?
Thank you for the restatement. I appreciate that. That was helpful. We did not compare Maine's economy now to Maine's economy predating the credit. We did look at how Maine compares to other states, and the comment about the fact that, my comment about the fact that the credit has been in place since 1995 was intended to convey that if we expect that the credit should help improve Maine's competitive position relative to other states, it's had a lot of time since 1995 to do that. So whatever improvement we might have expected to get from it should be reflected in how we compare now. It's not like it's a brand new credit and it might not have had a chance yet to really be known about and have an impact.
Senator Bennett, does that satisfy your request for now?
Yeah, well, I see Representative Arata has a question. I was kind of reformulating another one just because I guess one other aspect of that is, to what extent do other states, other jurisdictions that we might be competing with have a similar credit? And I think it's probably beyond the scope of the study, but we can delve into the details of that. But since it's piggybacked on a federal one, I would imagine that most other states have something similar to this. And so, it might be a question of, what if we did away with the credit, would we fall further? That kind of thing. So any insight you might have had in that line of thinking, I'd value as well.
Sure. it is really common that states have a credit similar to this. 35 of the states have a credit like this, or had one as of last year. And most of them do piggyback on the federal credit in some way, although the how exactly varies. And different states do have different rates. We talked about how Maine's is the sum of the 5% and the 7.5%. So some states have larger credits than Maine's. And if that's an area where it would be useful for this committee or taxation to get some more detail, then we could help with that.
I'll just affirm my interest in the line of questioning that Senator Bennett is putting on the table. I'm particularly curious to see if we have any additional data from the last 5-year period, which across the country there seems to have been a lot of movement towards investment in this area, and it'd be nice to see if our efforts in Maine have moved the needle in the last 5 years or so. So we have two additional members with questions. Representative Arata, followed by Representative Fay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's more of a statement than a question. I don't know if this is a fair way to evaluate the tax credit. If I understand correctly, in order to have something become a part of the gross domestic product, you have to actually have a product. And a lot of research and development occurs without ever producing a product. We gain new ideas, new technology that can be used elsewhere. I'll give you an example. When I was in a PhD program, I didn't produce a blessed thing, but I developed a diagnostic test using PCR, which was unheard of 20 years ago. True, it was in donkeys, but still, I like to think that that's useful. And now that we've had the pandemic and we can see how useful that PCR diagnostic technology is. So I just wanted to throw that out there that, if we're looking at eliminating or changing this credit, I don't think that this would be a valid measure of its success. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Arata. Just for clarification, though, my understanding of GDP is a bit different, which is it's an overall measure, an imperfect, but an attempt to have an overall measure of economic activity, which should be inclusive of R&D spending on equipment and wages and the like. But in any event, I think your point is well taken. Next up in the queue, I see Representative Fay.
Thank you, Senator Libby. My question is pretty basic in that I would, and I looked and maybe I didn't look hard enough. I would love to know which states have the tax credit and which states don't. And I think for me, lining those up with, the states on the chart that we're looking at right now would be interesting. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. Is a table with the 35 states readily available, or would that need to be created by OPEGA?
I think that is data that we could get for you. Some of the nuances there that make it tricky are that the credits can be quite different from state to state, but I think that there is more information that we can get you on that.
Even just a list would be helpful, I think.
Sure.
Further comments or questions at this time? Seeing none, I do want to just pause and allow another member to introduce themselves. We're joined by telephone by Representative Millett, who I understand is having internet challenges. So Representative Millett, I know you're on mute. I'll see if I can take you off mute. I don't think I can. Representative Millett, if you want to introduce yourself, you're welcome to. I just want to see if if Sabrina is able to take Representative Millett off mute. Okay. Technical challenges is the theme of this afternoon. We appreciate everyone's patience. So, Jen, you want to proceed?
Sure, thank you. And just before we move on to the recommendations, just in case it's helpful, I'd like to just take the opportunity to try to restate again what we were trying to get at, with the idea that the credit has been in place, and we would expect that if it was going to exert some upward pressure, it would have done so by now. We're not saying that the credit isn't exerting any upward pressure. We're not saying we don't know whether Maine's position might be worse without the credit. What we are saying is that the credit has been in place, and here is where Maine is. And so if the state desires to be somewhere higher up, the credit may not be enough as it exists now to make that happen. I don't know if that's at all helpful clarification.
It is helpful, and it's triggered some comments and questions. So we will start with Senator Bennett, followed by Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now your humor is, I'm going to stand down because your humor has made me slip my mind here, and I'll let Senator.
All right, we'll go to Senator Bailey, and Senator Bennett will collect his thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just curious if the 7 states that previously offered a credit and ceased implementation, if you were able to gather any data or information on the effect in those states of repealing their credit. I mean, I'm just looking at on this particular table we have in front of me, I see a lot of those states are still, in the upper end of R&D as a percentage of their GDP, but I'm just wondering if you had any other data that you were able to look at, or if those states in fact did any evaluations of the effect of repealing their credit. Thank you.
I don't have that right at my fingertips, but I can look into what we have and see what we can get you.
Thank you.
Senator Bennett.
Thank you. My question was about the utilization of the credit. I think at one point you said there was like 135 entities that used the credit in the recent year. And wondering about the volatility around that number. Is it pretty much the same 135? I see you didn't dig in with the Maine Revenue Services too deeply into finding out details, but I don't know if you had any qualitative information about like constancy of use, how often it's used year to year, whether that number of 135 or whatever it was changes a lot, and that kind of thing too might be useful. And I guess part of that is also an understanding of there's sort of a baked-in assumption if you expect something to move the needle, that it's going to be used by the population that it was created to serve or to expand that population. And whether we have any indicators whether that's the case, is everybody who should be using this or was designed to appeal to, are they finding it useful? Are they using it? Any information you may have collected on that would be useful as well.
Do you have some information about the second piece, which we'll get to in just a minute in recommendation 2. As far as the first piece goes, about more detail about the usage per year, if you have your copy of the report with you on page 5, there's a table that shows for each tax year from 2010 through 2019, how many taxpayers reported the credit according to the data that we got from Maine Revenue Services. So I think that might be helpful in answering your question.
Okay, in part, and you know if this is like the same cast of characters every year that essentially uses it. I see there is some volatility. But I wondered, you know, also whether that volatility could be based on the parameters of the credit, which don't allow it to be used as a refundable instrument, or right. So,
right, we do not know if it was the same businesses that were claiming it each year.
you don't know.
We don't know.
Okay, thanks. It is increasing in recent years. Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry that we don't have all of the answers to all of the questions. As I tried to say at the outset, this was a pretty limited project, but there is always the ability for us to go and focus on a particular area that you'd like additional information about and gather more information for you.
Maybe it's just the topic of research that makes us want more research.
We definitely appreciate that, Jen. We understand we asked for this report to be turned around in a short period of time, and that it is a higher level report. But I think the discussion here has been good and may trigger some additional conversation and work to be done at the work session. Since we were talking about it, page 5 does have a very useful table, and I encourage members to flip to it as we're talking about this item. But you'll note we've got numbers for individual income tax and numbers for corporate income tax. But keep in mind that many Maine businesses actually file on the individual income tax, and so it may not necessarily be an individual investor or researcher who's claiming the credit. It may be a business that files on the individual income tax return. It's representative. I did notice that I think Representative Millett now can speak to us. Representative Millett, you want to introduce yourself?
Solon Millett, House District 71.
Very good. Thank you, Representative. We know you're having internet challenges today. We're glad to have you with us listening in.
Yeah, I'm listening and enjoying the discussion.
Very good. Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. So Jen, please go to the next slide.
Okay, great. So OPEGA's first recommendation coming out of this review of the R&D credit was that the legislature, in consultation with MRS, DECD, and other stakeholders as appropriate, reevaluate and memorialize the R&D credit's goals and desired outcomes. We noted that the credit was established in 1995 and has never had goals, intended beneficiaries, or performance measures specified for it in statute. And with LD 308 under current consideration by the Maine legislature to increase the credit and authorize a marketing budget, this seemed like an opportune time to take a strategic look at how the legislature expects the credit to support R&D in Maine in comparison to and in conjunction with other policy tools for increasing R&D. In memorializing the credit's goals, target beneficiaries, and desired outcomes, OPEGA recommends that specific consideration be given to how those things work together to provide a framework for consideration of future amendments to the credit, and also provide a basis for future oversight and evaluation of the credit's performance. Consideration might also be given to how the credit is intended to fit within the state's overall R&D strategy and environment, and within the state's 10-year strategic economic development plan. Our second recommendation gets to something that Senator Bennett was talking about a couple of minutes ago. Our second recommendation is that the legislature, in consultation with MRS and DECD as appropriate, consider amending the design of the R&D credit as needed to ensure that intended beneficiaries can access the credit. And we think this would be most useful after the goals and intended beneficiaries have been sort of reevaluated and memorialized. For the purposes of this evaluation, the intended beneficiaries were identified as businesses conducting R&D and indirectly qualified organizations performing contracted R&D. However, at present, some businesses conducting R&D in Maine may be unable to access the benefits of the credit. One reason for this is the credit's incremental design, which means that credit benefits are only available on taxpayer R&D spending over and above a base amount of spending from prior years. So benefits are not available for businesses with consistent R&D investment, whether that's consistently high or consistently low investment. Incremental credits like this can be a great way to target benefits only to taxpayers that are increasing some desired activity, whether it's job creation or, in this case, R&D spending. However, an incremental design can be less effective if the target beneficiaries are actually broader, not just businesses that are increasing their R&D here, but all businesses conducting R&D in Maine. Another design element that can make some businesses unable to access the credit are the limitations on claims. For example, the credit is non-refundable, which means that businesses without any tax liability will be unable to realize its benefits and therefore unable to experience the reductions in the cost of their R&D investments. So a business that is in very early stage R&D, a business that may not have significant revenue yet, may not be able to access the benefits of the credit. Non-refundability is another design element that can be really useful. It can be a great fiscal tool to limit the state's revenue loss from a tax expenditure. However, it can also be a barrier to accessing the credit. And like the incremental design, both of these things really are design elements that are a balancing act. On the one hand, you can seek to minimize the cost to the state and be as efficient as possible with state funds, while on the other hand, you might want to ensure that the credit you're hoping will influence business decisions is accessible fully to the target audience. The optimal spot in that balance might change over time, depending on economic conditions and policy priorities. And OPEGA suggests that it might be useful to reconsider this balance when thinking about memorializing the goals for this credit, as we discussed in recommendation 1, or when weighing amendments to the credit, such as those proposed in LD 308. Another factor that we found may limit uptake of the credit is uncertainty for participants. There are a lot of complex nuances in the definitions of qualifying expenses for the federal credit. And because our state credit relies on those same definitions, our credit suffers from the same complexities. We heard from stakeholders we interviewed that it may require a really sophisticated accounting department or even hiring an outside consultant to successfully navigate the credit. And this can put the credit out of reach for some smaller businesses. The credit's complexity also makes it difficult for businesses to be confident about which R&D expenses will successfully make it through an audit. As a result, before they spend the money, when they're assessing the financial feasibility of an R&D investment, there can be a lot of uncertainty for them about how much credit they can actually expect to receive in the future if they make that investment, and therefore how much of a reduction they can expect in the cost of that investment that they're looking to make. This uncertainty, coupled with the difficulty of navigating the credit, can lead to a lower uptake. And our final recommendation was that the legislature, in consultation again with MRS and DECD as appropriate, determine what data is needed for effective oversight of the R&D credit, and make changes to statute or practice as needed to ensure that the necessary data is readily available in the future. As you've heard throughout this, we found there is really little readily available data about the use of the R&D credit beyond the estimated state revenue loss figures and the estimated counts of affected taxpayers reported biennially in the Maine State Tax Expenditure Report. This lack of data limits the ability of policymakers to measure and evaluate performance of the credit. And specifically, we found that some data relevant to the measures established for this evaluation are not currently collected. For example, the number, location, and income of employees added or retained was identified as a performance measure for this evaluation. However, no data elements relative to the number of jobs created or retained in connection with the credit, the geographic location of those jobs, or information about the income of the employees of credit claimants is currently collected by MRS or by any other state agency. Another data issue we encountered is that some data reported to Maine Revenue Services on the state R&D credit worksheets could be useful for oversight of the credit, but is not readily accessible because the data is stored in PDF image files. Most of the data on those worksheets is confidential taxpayer data, but some of it could possibly be provided in aggregate to support the oversight of the credit. However, even aggregating the data can be resource intensive when you're dealing with a PDF image file for each worksheet, and that's the current data storage system. When considering what data might be needed to inform future evaluation and oversight of the credit, we thought a few other things were worth keeping in mind. One is that stakeholders interviewed by OPEGA noted that businesses may consider data about their R&D investments to be highly confidential, with the potential to expose their R&D plans to competitors and put them at a competitive disadvantage. We heard from stakeholders that certain data collection requirements could potentially discourage businesses from using the credit, which could potentially undermine the credit's ability to help attract R&D to Maine. With those stakeholder concerns in mind, we tried to think about alternate data sources. And we noted that if collection of business-specific data from R&D credit users is untenable, ongoing collection and assessment of aggregate data about R&D activity in the state could potentially still assist the legislature in its oversight of the R&D credit as part of Maine's overall R&D strategy. For example, performance indicators from the National Science Foundation, such as those we've talked about today and that are included in the report, are readily available and present no confidentiality issues. At the same time, there are limitations to using National Science Foundation data. First, the data, of course, speaks to Maine's R&D activity generally, rather than specifically to the R&D credits participation and impacts. And second, there is a lag in National Science Foundation data. So for example, the most recent Maine R&D data from the National Science Foundation reflects calendar year 2020, and some indicators are less recent. And while that lag doesn't diminish the data's value for monitoring trends over time, it does make it less useful for checking the real-time status of R&D in Maine or the more immediate impacts of more recent policy changes. As is often the case with tax incentive data, this whole data collection issue is not one that is super easy and straightforward to tackle. And in the report, we've tried to describe the issue in some detail and to note considerations for policymaker use in plotting a path forward. And other than discussing next steps, that is all I have for you. I'm happy to take any other questions.
Thank you very much, Jen, and to the whole team, including folks at Maine Revenue Services and the ECD and the beneficiaries who spoke to OPEGA. Are there further questions or comments from the committee? Jen, you had said, I think 2 slides back, that the incremental nature of the benefit certainly helps a business that increases substantially their R&D investment, but does not benefit a business that consistently invests in R&D. And my question is, it appears that's drawing from the federal credit. The federal credit is set up in that fashion, if I understand it correctly. Are there states that have figured out a way to incent or support businesses that make consistent investment as opposed to incremental investment?
Sure. That's something that we could, again, bring you more detail on if that would be helpful. Just at a high level, one thing that other states sometimes do is have a credit that is not piggybacking on the federal credit. And then, you can be incremental or not based on what your policy goals are and which businesses you're looking to direct the benefits to. I believe we may have also seen that there were some that had sort of different ways. I want to say a different level of incrementalness, but I'm not sure if that's communicating it, but they had a lower base essentially that you had to get over in order to access the credit for the state level credit. And that's something that, as I said, if you're interested, we can dig up some more detail about.
I think Lucia raised her hand, so Lucia, go ahead.
Just a general, there were a couple things I was able to look up while Jen was speaking, so I just wanted to offer those when it's the appropriate moment.
Yeah, I think we've generated a number of questions that committee members are interested in learning more about. So perhaps the staff can gather those requests and we can discuss them at our work session on this report, and sort of narrow down the key pieces that we want to task OPEGA with collecting for us. But Lucia, go ahead.
So one item I think that one table that is in the report that might be of interest, particularly relevant to Senator Bennett and Senator Libby's questions, is table 4 on page 15, which has, it may not answer all the questions, but it does have some additional data on the actual R&D expenditures in Maine by year from 2015 to 2019. This was data we were able to obtain from the National Science Foundation. So that might be of interest. It includes rankings, but also includes absolute amounts. So I just wanted to point you to that. And then back on Senator Libby, your initial question about, and I don't know if this will fully answer it, but the question about how carry forward claims that just have carry forward amounts in them, whether they would be counted. So I was looking at the research expense tax credit worksheet that MRS uses, and there is, it's separated out as a line if you're claiming as a carry forward, and you could claim only as a carry forward, it appears to me. So the total claimed is a sum of several lines, and one of those lines is if you're only claiming carry forward.
So if I understood what you said, Lucia, and we can confirm this with Maine revenue, when we're looking at a really stellar year of filers, so the last few years in the table, that may not represent the number of businesses who've made a substantial investment that year. That may include carry forward from prior year.
Yes, I think we should confirm with MRS, but that's what I would infer from how the worksheet is structured.
Understood. Senator Bennett.
Thank you. looking at that table 4 on page 15, it's interesting data. Did you do any correlation between the data there suggesting several indicators of R&D spend in Maine, and correlate that to the utilization of the credit at all? And I don't, it's hard to tell what, I've forgotten years ago what the NSF, actually measures, how they get that data, but clearly they're not using tax data to derive that, which is this, the utilization of the tax credit in Maine is based on that. So any correlation there that you've seen?
The correlation was not something that we analyzed to date. And the NSF, we could get you more details, but I believe most of the data that we're using comes from surveys of businesses that they conduct.
Might be interesting to do a quick, simple, even an eyeball kind of correlation between these the years listed here. There's several different indicators of R&D investment or performance or whatever term you expenditure, and to see how that compares with the utilization of credit in those years. It might give some indication as to whether we're whether the data is flawed or whether we're really targeting well. Thanks.
Thanks, Senator Bennett. Representative Fay.
Thanks, Senator Libby. Actually, I think Senator Bennett touched on, and this is what touched on a question that I have, and I'd like to kind of tease it out just a little bit more. It's funny when we start to look at tables and have conversations, how it generates more and more questions, of course. So I was looking at table 4, and under state government R&D expenditures. I want to check my understanding of what that means. Is that is that simply the tax expenditure, or does that include other potential investments that the state had made in R&D? I'd like to just kind of tease out what that number means.
Thank you. That's a great question. It's not intended to be this tax credit. It is data that we got from the National Science Foundation that is intended to represent the state government's total spending on R&D.
Good question. Further questions or comments from members? Okay. Not sure if
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say I really I really like this report a lot. I've been pestering you with questions, and I'm mindful of that. But I mean, this is a really good report, and I appreciate it. Good report should generate lots of questions. And I just I appreciate your work on these things.
Well said. And agreed. I believe we have a representative from Maine Revenue Service available to us to answer questions. And it looks like Heather from Maine Revenue in the waiting room. So I think there are a few questions for Maine Revenue. Unless there's objection, I'd like to move Heather into the meeting. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. If you would introduce yourself, your role at Maine Revenue.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Heather Popdak from Maine Revenue Services, Director of the Income and Estate Tax Division. And good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I had posed a couple questions, so I'll restate them. Number one is when we're looking at the number of filers who took the credit on the table that's contained on page, I don't know, contained in the report. Is that total number of filers? Does that include folks that are claiming a carry forward?
So I just want to be sure on where that data came from. The table 4 on page 15 mentions the NSF research activity data for Maine. Were the numbers, actually, those aren't the,
I'm
those
sorry, I
are
was
the
trying to
wrong
find the
numbers.
page number for you. Page 5, table 1.
I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, so the Maine R&D credit claim tax years, and so that information was provided by MRS. Often what we do to collect these numbers is, yes, we take the, anybody who had a carry forward, they would still claim that credit on Schedule A, which is our credits worksheet for our credits schedule for, say, the individuals, or the C for the corporations. And so that would include those taxpayers who may have expended in prior years, and they would just be using the carry forward because perhaps they were limited as to taxable income, so they needed to carry forward that money at that time, but there might not be any current year expenditures for R&D at that time.
Okay, thank you. So I guess that answers my question. For the benefit of folks listening and paying attention to what we're talking about here, it may look impressive that there are 217 entities claiming the credit in 2019, but that may not reflect the activity that occurred in that year. It could be activity from years and years ago. So it's a bit of an inflated number.
That is a 15-year carry forward.
Yeah. Ms. Popadak, the 15-year carry forward, I mean, is that long? Is that a long time period for a tax filer to be able to claim a credit, or is it kind of normal?
It's generous. So what that means is, with this carry forward, is because this is a non-refundable credit, you need to have you have to have a tax liability to utilize the credit. And so if a company has a longer window for which they need to generate taxable income, this will allow them to have that time cushion to generate, income to utilize that carry forward.
And my last question has to do with data collection. It's sort of become a running joke that we can't collect the data because it's contained on PDF images. It's not a very usable format. So we talked about that a lot at the seed capital tax credit report. I mean, what do we need to do to be able to collect that data in an efficient way, have policymakers use it, and have taxpayers' confidentiality protected? Is it a big cash investment in a database, or are there ways we can solve that problem creatively in a low-cost way?
So just a little background. Of course, we designed the tax returns and the schedules for our business purpose, which is to review the returns and make sure the returns are accurate. And so right now, the worksheets for a lot of our credits are not captured. The data is not captured. So the research expense tax credit, if you look at the spreadsheet, the worksheet, you would see not these little boxes that get captured. So we would have to have someone go into each individual return that claimed the credit, and you would need to search through the corporate return or the pass-through entity return or the individual return to look for whatever entity generated that credit. And then you need to pull that out. We don't have that information in an aggregate manner. We don't capture it. So this could become a capturable worksheet. It would have, there would be costs associated with that, such as systems costs, data capturing costs, data storage costs, and some costs to modify the database. But it is possible we have other documents that we do capture this data. So as to the expense, I would not want to say because I don't have that information. In general, we have used an approximation of $11,000 per line. If we have to do something, kind of a line here and there, where it would probably be a rework of the entire worksheet, we would not want to comment yet on the estimated price.
Last, just follow up. Are there other credits that have been converted to a format where we can activate it, data easily?
Where they are, and I can't think of any at the moment. I would have to go through and see which one of our, we would have to look at it's easy to determine once we look at it, but it's, I would have to go through and look to see. It is less expensive for us to not capture because we need to train the forms with the imaging machines. It's not as easy as just using a non-capturable form.
Right. Okay. Are there any additional comments from Ms. Papadak? Comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for joining us today. Okay, appreciate everyone's participation and discussion so far. Doesn't seem like there are any more comments or questions on this subject for now, so we will carry this item forward to our next GOC meeting. We'll have a work session, public hearing rather, at our next meeting. Lucia?
I was just going to say public hearing, but you caught yourself. Thank you, Senator Libby.
Okay. And the taxation committee is working on a bill presently on the R&D credit, so we'll make sure to communicate this information over to those folks, and hopefully the bill can sort of track our process as it gets developed, and the data that's been collected is useful to them. So again, thanks to the OPEGA staff for all your efforts on this project. We'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a work session on the OPEGA information brief on oversight of Maine's Child Protective Services. We have received a number of materials over a period of time related to this project. Of course, we received the presentation at our last meeting. We're now in a work session, and I want to turn it over to Lucia and staff to walk through the materials and high-level info that we've received so far.
Thank you, Senator Libby and members of the GOC. Yes, you have arrived at the work session stage for the information brief on oversight of Child Protective Services. This report is one of 3 components of the OPEGA overall review of Child Protective Services, and the information brief had a limited focus looking at the overall structure of federal and state oversight of CPS at a high level, and collecting and synthesizing information in a descriptive way. This report was presented and released on January 21st, 2022, and OPEGA discussed and presented the full report and noted lessons and observations in 5 areas. The GOC held a public hearing on the report on February 11th at your last meeting and received testimony from 5 individuals. And at the presentation and hearing, the GOC expressed interest in a handful of topics, and some of these are going to be directly addressed and the subject of the next installment of your Child Protective Services evaluation with the report that OPEGA is scheduled to deliver to you on March 25th, so later this month. In your packets that you've received by mail and email and hard copies in your seats, hopefully everybody has them by now. There's a memo from me behind tab 3 that goes through some of what I just sets the stage with some of what I just discussed, and then has a series of attachments to provide some of the information that was requested. So there were 2 areas in which the GOC requested information. One was more information on how Maine compares to all 50 states in the results of the federal oversight under the Child and Family Services Reviews, or CFSR. So round 3 of those reviews were completed for all states a few years ago. And we included some information in the brief, and people were interested in more depth and detail on all 50 states. So attached to the memo and are 2 documents. One is visual presentation in bar charts that show where Maine ranks among the 50 states on the 7 different outcomes that are evaluated. And then we also have it in a chart format that provides you the percentage conformity with each of those outcomes, and also provides a binary yes or no conformity with what are called the systemic factors, or factors that influence the metrics. If it would be helpful or you're interested in screen sharing any of those, I'm happy to do so. If you have them all in front of you and don't feel that's necessary, that's fine as well. At a high level, I would say I find the charts and appreciate staff pulling those together. The charts that are the bar charts, I think, provide a very good visual to see what the national average is. We also put the New England average, and then we put each state, and Maine is in red on those.
Lucia, I think we would benefit from just very brief description or explanation of these charts. I think it would
Okay,
help.
sure. Let me try and screen share here. One moment. Okay, can you see a chart with blue, red, and yellow bars? Okay, perfect. So this document for the there's 7 outcomes in 3 different areas. And what we've plotted here for you is the percent in which the state in the 3rd round Child and Family Services Review was in conformance with the standard for that outcome. So for instance, under safety outcome 1 is children are first and foremost protected from abuse and neglect. Percent conformity is around 95%. I mean, to be rated in conformity. So the US average is here, and Maine is here, right next to the US average. But not in conformance. Maine is at 73%. So scrolling down, the next safety outcome, children are safely maintained in their homes whenever possible and appropriate. You can see Maine is considerably below the US average and the New England average. I do want to note that, and I should have noted this right at the outset, but the US Department of Health and Human Services does caution states from doing detailed state-by-state comparisons because of the variations in conditions, the structure of how services delivered, and as well as the timing that the data was collected. So I just want to caution that this should be taken as like at a high level and not necessarily looking at specific numbers because of these variations. So just with that caveat, I think this does give you a picture but I would encourage you to just take note of that guidance from the federal government. There are also several permanency outcomes, which are permanency and stability in living situations is the first one. And Maine is actually above the US and New England average on that one. But as you can see, no states are anywhere near full conformity. So no states are in conformance with that one. On permanency outcome 2, the continuity of family relationships and connections is preserved for children. Maine is above the US average, above the New England average, but again, does not meet the percent conformity to be judged in conformance. The last group of outcomes for which the states are rated are well-being outcomes. So the first is that families have enhanced capacity to provide for their children's needs. And Maine's results were right around the US average and above the New England average. But again, this is a situation in which there were no states that achieved the conformance, 95% conformance. Well-being outcome 2 is the outcome where Maine did achieve conformance with the federal standards and is top ranked over here on the left. So this is children receive appropriate services to meet their educational needs. And then finally, the 7th outcome that's part of these federal reviews is well-being outcome 3, children receive adequate services for their physical and mental health needs. Maine is below both the US average and the New England average and is at 53%. So hopefully this gives you some additional detail. I think it was originally Senator Bailey, perhaps, who asked for that. I hope you all have these charts with you. Like I did mention, there is also a graphical chart. I think that would be very difficult to see on the screen, but if you would like me to try to share that, I can. It is has all the numbers for each state on these 7 outcomes, and then has the yes, no on the systemic factors.
I agree. I don't think that chart will present well on the screen, so I know members have that mailed to them. But I appreciate you walking through those other graphs. Thank you, Lucia. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lucia and staff. I found these to be very helpful. I think they at least helped us to get to what I remember is Senator Libby's question to the safety science people, just in terms of, can you point us in the direction of maybe some states that were doing things well that we could look to? I know that they were very hesitant to do that. So for me, this at least helps in that area. And I understand the limitations of the chart or whatever, but you do see some trends, and you do see, like, for example, Delaware seems to be, near the top in so many metrics. So, maybe that's a place we should look. I don't know, but I think that these are very helpful. A process question. So do these charts become a part of the briefing, or would we, when we vote on accepting the briefing, have to, vote to amend it and have these added as an appendix or something like that? How do we do that mechanically to make sure that this becomes part of that report, that briefing? Thank you.
Sure, that's a good process question, and not one that has happened during my tenure. So I might need to look into the specifics of that. Right now, you're correct, they're not part of the report document, but we could think about, I guess I'd have to look into what the logistical mechanics are of that, amending the report to add it as an appendix potentially, or if there's some other mechanism. I'll look into that as quickly as I can.
Thank you.
Good question. I've been on the committee for a while. I can't recall whether we are able to amend a report or not, but I know in the past we've received material outside of the report that gets some kind of vote of endorsement from the GOC, and it's captured in the materials on the GOC website alongside the original report. Okay, so we are in work session, and I see Senator Bennett has his hand up. Please go ahead, Senator Bennett.
Thank you. Just a question. Looking at those charts, the first one there, I don't quite get what's being measured there. I mean, New York State comes in at 100%, and it says children are first and foremost protected from abuse and neglect, and yet in other charts it appears that maybe they're not 100% protected from abuse and neglect. And so I'm just, in Maine on that one is quite, well, it's where are we? We're pretty low, right? I guess we're near the US average, but what does that mean? What's being measured there?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. I might need to get back to you on the specific details, but this process is a federal Child and Family Services review. And as part of that process, there are case reviews that are conducted on a sample of cases in the child welfare system that is drawn. So in Maine, there's 65 cases were part of that sample at the time that this review was done. The case files are pulled and reviewed in detail for those. And there's a very structured, in-depth review protocol instrument that is used with a series of questions under each of these items. So under item 1, there would be a series of questions that are used, and the reviewer is looking through the case file to see to what extent to answer each of these questions underneath it. And then that gets developed into, that gets rolled up to the level of the item, and then they get a rating on that item. So it is on, I guess what I can tell you at this point, and we could provide you with the underlying questions, and actually in the report that we're presenting in 2 weeks, we will actually be pulling out some of the specific questions on some of these items and reviewing, reporting on results for case reviews on those items and questions. So there may be some more information that will help there, and we'd be happy to pull together other information as needed to help make that a little bit clearer.
Thank you. The frustration for me, I'm sure a lot of other people, is that, we're trying to look at this sort of this data, which has, gone through various series of iterations for to make it conform with other data comparable here and there. And it's just like, we're just worried about like individual kids. And it just seems, I'm a little frustrated myself, just trying to figure out what do I do with this information in a way that actually helps Maine. It's interesting, but it helps make Maine families better and make kids safer. And that's what I'm looking at, all this information, trying to get to that. I'm sure we all are. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. Okay, so we are in work session, and we are in this unique situation of the policy committee doing a lot of work on policy making, concurrent to our process trying to shine the light on the system. So 2 trains leaving the station sort of at different times and at different positions down the track. But despite that, I think we are fortunate to have Senator Claxton in the waiting room. I'm going to move him over. We also have our own House co-chair, Representative Stover, who serves on the HHS committee. And I'd like to sort of put a pause on our work session so we can get a bit of an update on what HHS has done with the bills in their possession, so that GOC members can benefit from that information. And then, of course, we'll receive a report from OPEGA in 2 weeks, which will look more closely at OCFS, which I hope will inform that policymaking process. So I see Senator Claxton has joined us, and I'll turn the floor over to him.
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to be visible or not? If I'm supposed to be, then I'm not, but that's okay. Oh, then there we go. I just got promoted. All right. I didn't want to talk through the wormhole. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I'd like to, there we go. It's always good to see you, Senator Claxton.
Thank you, sir. So my name's Ned Claxton, and I have the honor and pleasure of co-chairing Health and Human Services with Representative Meyer. As we get started, I think it's important to flag a couple of things that I think will reflect on what Senator Bennett has just raised, in that there's the constant struggle in social services and social science to translate from the macro view to the micro view. How do we translate population information to the kid down the street who's in a bad situation? And how do we learn from that? And so that just informs our frustrations with these processes. There's some language that we've acquired, I think it's safe to say, in HHS this year that I want to highlight too, is we've been increasingly trying to make the distinction between child welfare and child protection. Child welfare is the full range of things we can do to help our kids get a good start, stay safe, grow to their maximum potential, and avoid needing to have anything to do with OCFS. That's the range of things that we're paying attention to in child welfare. Child protection is when we have identified a family that's having trouble taking care of their kid for whatever reason. And that's when we get into the issue of child welfare. The other major point I want to emphasize is the incredible tension between, we need to get all of these kids back into their homes. That's New York's 100%. I can't believe that number is right, because that means literally that nobody was taken out of the house. So that leads me to question the data, but that's a separate issue. So there's this amazing tension I've increasingly come to appreciate between how do we get kids back into their biologic or birth families, and how do we keep them safe? Because there's a tension there. If you don't pull enough kids out, then you're not doing enough to keep them safe. If you're letting too many kids, if you're putting them all back in the house, then you've defeated the purpose of child protection. So it's quite a fraught area in which to work. And I have amazing respect for the people who are willing to do that and show up the next day and the day after that. But we could pull them all out of the houses whenever there was a question and find them foster care and keep them safe. Well, then all we have to deal with was every one of those kids be traumatized, and they'd have early kid time trauma, and that has repercussions down the road. So I just want to flag that. The other language we picked up increasingly is that discussions in terms of prevention, primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Primary prevention being, what do we do to help families grow, mature, be safe, be healthy environments? That's primary prevention. That's Head Start in some cases. That's good jobs, good housing. That's childcare. Also, there is secondary prevention. A family bubbles up as being a source of concern. A kid has some unexplained bruises at school and the teacher gets worried. A bunch of different things can surface to trigger the need to do some additional evaluation, ask some more questions, And that would fall into the category of secondary prevention, so that there are programs like home builders and kinship respite and things like that that give families a chance to regroup and try and get it together so that they don't progress to become involved with the child protection system, which is really what we know of and gets the high profile coverage. So I just want to introduce those terms, and I'd be glad to speak to those later on. You have in front of you a 3-pager. What I heard when I was here last was some frustration with the feeling that we weren't doing anything. And so I wanted to capture what's happened between November 21st and the Casey Family Report and February 22nd, when we had the second of our hearings on Child Protective Service related bills. I won't walk through all of those, but you can see.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just a pause for just a moment. The document that Senator Claxton is referencing, members can find in their inbox and now on their screen. So thank you, staff. And secondly, we are joined by another GOC member. Just want to give Senator DeChambeau a chance to introduce herself.
Good afternoon. Just left my meeting and went all the way to AFA. Couldn't find you guys, so that's why I'm so delayed here. Senator DeChambeau, District 32. I represent Biddeford, Dayton, Lyman, Alfred, Arundel, and Kennebunkport, and so glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator DeChambeau. Senator Claxton, thank you for giving us just a brief pause. Please proceed.
Well, this also gives me a chance to thank Lucia for her help with getting this stuff ready to present in this format. So that shouldn't go unsaid. So thank you, Lucia. So this was a timeline that I just started to put together as we began this work. And because it became quickly apparent that child welfare and child protective issues were going to be major focus for the session. And so what was laid out here is between November 21st and the Casey Family Report. And then if you'll scroll down, we have the 2 hearings on the 17th and the 22nd of February, where we considered the 9 bills right there. Thank you. The 9 bills that were most specifically related to child welfare. And I'm sorry, to the Ombudsman's office and to child welfare in general. And just a brief thumbnail of what was in those bills is captured here, but we can get into the details of each bill as we get to the work sessions, which began on the 24th. And LD 1960 stole some of the best ideas from the conversations up until that point, and put them into a restructuring, re-strengthening of the Child Welfare Ombudsman's Office. By converting to a 5-year contract, they were the intent was to isolate from undue political pressures. The staffing of that office will be determined by the ombudsman. They're now going to get health insurance, which they didn't get. They're going to submit their own budget. And built into statute now is automatic notification of any serious injury or fatality within 48. That says hours. You can't see it. 48 hours. Also mandated is that they have an opportunity to review any policy or practice changes before they go into effect. This is all now locked up in statute, and a piece that's missing from this list, which I should not have left out, is they now have a seat on the child death and serious injury panel, which was not the case before. So there's more cross-fertilization across some of the citizens groups that we heard about earlier when OPEGA submitted their first report. So that bill passed, 1960, was passed unanimously in HHS. And as I said, focused entirely on the welfare ombudsman and tried to give that office greater responsibility for direction or feedback to the department about shortcomings it identified or opportunities it identified. So we think that's a significant change, and that's why the committee passed it unanimously. On the next page, we'll get to some of the other, oh, there it is at the end there. So it adds 200,000 to the budget line, which brings it in line with all of the other bills that were proposed for the Ombudsman's office. And it gives the office, like I said, a seat on the Child Welfare Advisory Panel. So then I was, any questions? I appreciated the opportunity to sit in with you and the review of the testimony a couple days after that. And then we had an informational hearing from folks who are deeply involved in child welfare and heard some requests from them. That information was then carried into our work session. And that got us to LD 393, which adds a coordinator focused on child welfare services to work across state departments. It allocates money for programs that have been shown to be worthwhile by the feds in promoting family wellness and avoiding family fracture. So there's two programs there, the home builders as one and the parents as teachers as another. We have so many more kids now going into kinship care because of the opioid crisis that bill increases the support for those kinship families that take over the care of a kin. And then we added to the contingency fund for child protective, which allows some discretionary spend on some things that help keep families safe and productive and not needing as much support. That fund already exists. This just increased it, again, because the number of families involved in child welfare has gone up a bit over time, even though it's coming down now. And then we asked the Opioid Recovery Fund Advisory Council to increase rural funding for a major contributor to disrupting our families now, which is the substance use disorder. And LD 393 was passed in committee, as was LD 1824. And I'm only summarizing all the work that Representative Stover did because this was her bill. And this was, it became a 2-year pilot to evaluate what happens when we get legal aid to families early in the child protective service, in the child protective process. There's some evidence that families who have a better understanding, having had the opportunity to work with legal resources about what the decisions are, what a contract means for certain safety things, that they'll do better. And so for that reason, this was a 2-year pilot, District 4 with Indigent Legal Services to try and help these families avoid some of the things that happen when they don't follow the safety contracts that are part of their work with Child Protective. So that one was passed too, as was LD 1850, which provided intensive case management and coordination. Increasingly, the term is wraparound services. These are for families who are clearly at risk, but for whom there's a good chance of recovery. That if you provide them help with support with housing and food and how to communicate in families and some help with transportation occasionally and emotional, psychological, mental health support, these families do better and have a much better outcome in terms of reunification or avoiding disruption. And then 1853 was a bill that we passed unanimously, and it mandated that the advisory panel, Child Welfare Advisory Panel, and the Death and Serious Injury Panel will report to HHS on a quarterly basis We had already gotten permission from the presiding officers for meetings in June and September to get those reports. And as I looked at what came out of OPEGA and Casey and some of the other reports that we heard in February, we mandated attention to those issues by asking that they be presented in terms of primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention efforts. They be identified as such. One of the issues that you may remember from Casey family was about family meetings as a great way to promote communication with those trying to provide services to kids and with families and with community resources. So the question is being asked that the department report to us quarterly on how they're doing with realizing the Casey family recommendations. And that also included bringing more people who have been in the system into the development and operations improvement effort. It asks for a review of the domestic violence response. As an example, sometimes the non-offending parent gets labeled as an enabler and therefore not safe for the kid, so that both parents lose custody while both parents are separated and they're both dealing with one being the domestic violence perpetrator and the other being the survivor. So the intention there is to relook at how we decide whether the non-offending parent might or might not be able to care for their kid. And then it was identified by these groups and reports that the guardians ad litem needed some additional support and help. So we mandated that and reporting on that, and gave them authorization to bring to us any requests for legislation to improve the system anywhere along the line on these quarterly reports, which are to go for 2 years. So that's basically where we found ourselves as of the time I put this together. I know we're waiting for the report in 2 weeks and the one in September. We passed some additional legislation today. We didn't. We passed some additional bills out of committee today that would further strengthen some of the efforts to get people who are getting TANF services to become productive, employed people as part of a workforce effort. So that's pretty much summarizes where we are at this point. I'd be glad to go into more detail, but I probably gave you more than you wanted.
Thank you, Senator Claxton. I think that was just right. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Claxton. That was very helpful. So I have one question and one comment. The question I have is on LD 1960. I wasn't clear on who would be reporting the fatality or serious injury to the ombudsman within 48 hours, whose responsibility that was, and what definition for fatality, that's easy, but more importantly, serious injury was used in that. And if you don't know that off the top of your head, I can obviously look up the amendment.
I can answer the first one very easily, and that is the Office of Child and Family Services. As soon as they hear of a death of any child that has been touched in that system, whether they're actively in the system or not now, they need to notify the ombudsman in 48 hours. So that's in statute. I just didn't put it in the summary here. But that's the reporting mechanism from OCFS to ombudsman.
Okay, so again, to clarify, it's not any fatality or serious injury. It's only if that child has been in the child protective system.
Has been involved with child protection even more liberally than that, not having been taken out of the home necessarily, right, but identified at risk and some services provided by OCFS. We wanted to lower the bar on that one so that we got more reports to look at.
Thank you. And then my comment is just that people know that I do sit on the Child Welfare Advisory Panel, and looking at these bills, it looks like you have done an incredible job incorporating our recommendations from our report this year. So thank you for that.
Well, it would have been folly not to take advantage of the skill and time and energy that these citizens panels put in. So when we started our session, we had 3 or 4 bills that we knew were placeholders, so that as these things came up, we could slot them into it. And that's what came of 1853. It would have been different if we hadn't already included some other parts in other bills. So it was very intentional over time. And serious injury, I assume, means emergency room visit with any documented injury or a hospitalization, but I don't know the term specifically. I don't know the definition in statute.
Thank you. Representative Stover.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Claxton. And I just wanted to respond to Senator Bailey and say that 1824 was taken from page 16 of the MCWAP report. So we heard you. Thank you for that.
I may have had something to do with that recommendation.
Well, great job.
Additional comments or questions for Senator Claxton? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations, Senator Claxton, for a well-done job in terms of not only following where we were in the early stages, but also all these bills. Could you give us a current status picture of the 5 that you have reported out of committee? I think 1960 has been on our calendars, but I was curious. You said the committee had unanimously endorsed 1824, 1850, 1853, and 393. Have they reached floor action yet?
They have not. I'm looking forward to speaking to them on the floor. Or even better, having it go under the hammer.
Good, thank you. Did 1960 get through the legislative process yet?
I don't think it's been on our calendar.
It hasn't, okay.
Thank you, Representative Miller.
Further questions or comments? Okay, I have 2. One is related to our work and one is not. I have a sick toddler who's napping, and so I may be pulled away when he awakes. It's one of the benefits of working from home. And in that event, I'll turn the virtual gavel over to Representative Stover. Number 2, though, question for Senator Claxton. When we were hearing from folks last spring, summer, and fall about the most recent child deaths that brought us to this work, one of the key disconnects in communication occurred at the ground level when domestic violence reports were going unheeded by OCFS staff. At least that's how it appeared, or that's how it was conveyed. The disconnect between law enforcement and OCFS, the disconnect between the public school system and OCFS. Could you speak at all to what in the package of bills HHS passed out, to what extent those issues are tackled in that package?
The issue around communication is most clearly addressed, but not as the specificity that you raise, Senator Libby, in the quarterly reports. This gives us an opportunity to have the department in front of us every 3-4 months to ask those kinds of questions and what they're doing. The issue around family meetings was an attempt to bring some community into the conversation in terms of how to exchange information that was important. So that's where it's touched, but it's not specifically addressed in these bills. And I defer to Representative Stover to correct me if I'm wrong about that.
No, the only thing I might add, Senator, is I think that in the discussion our committee had on LD 1834, there were the members of the committee felt strongly that for a variety of reasons, HHS was not, even though we're the committee of jurisdiction, we haven't had such a direct oversight capacity. I think Senator Claxton touched on this, but there'll be the quarterly reports and other work will bring a greater emphasis to the work of the Health and Human Services Committee moving forward. And I think that combined with the reports, ramping that oversight, not to replace what Government Oversight Committee does, but the oversight being the committee of jurisdiction to the Department of Health and Human Services. I think there were some reasons why things got a little convoluted a while ago. And I feel like through this work and through the discussion and a lot of hours spent together, we've sort of gotten things back on track for the Health and Human Services Committee. And I commend our two chairs for doing that.
I thank you for those comments. Maybe I can restate the question. Maybe I wasn't as clear as I could have been. We were told back in 2021, mid 2021, that the warning signs for some of these tragedies did not appear to be heeded by the appropriate actors. They didn't show up in caseworker reports, or the leads were not investigated thoroughly, or calls, reports weren't answered, calls weren't returned when neighbors were raising warning signs or when providers were raising warning signs. And so it's not the oversight communication piece, it's the on the ground communication piece between families, providers, and OCFS that appeared to be challenged. So my question was about, to what extent does the package deal with those issues?
So somewhat in terms of a bill we just passed today that would monitor the number of hours that caseworkers are working and whether they're being asked to do much more in a 70 or 80 hour week than they should be asked to do. I'm not being facetious. There are instances when you have to pull a kid out of a house at the end of a week when you've already worked 6 shifts, long shifts, and you got to drive to New Hampshire to get them to their kin. So a good deal of the focus has been on trying to help the people who are in the trenches be allowed to do their job, which was what we heard loud and clear from Casey. And that requires fewer responsibilities, more support. There was also another bill passed recently that would create positions, we just went through it in the budget, that would add paralegals to each of the 8 districts. And that would help with doing the court filings, which are distracting the caseworkers right now as the caseload increases. There's also in the budget provision for folks for hiring caseworkers who would do the weekend and night coverage. That would offload tremendously from our currently overworked caseworkers. So I think it's been focused on workforce right sizing and support. And the feeling is, and I don't have data and I struggle to figure out how to collect it, is that if the caseworkers are allowed to do their job the way that they want to do it, the kids will be safer. And so what do we need to do to give them a chance? What environment do we need to create? And that's why I went specifically at the 6 or 7 Casey recommendations, because those indirectly address all of that concern.
The other piece I would add is that if you look in these bills, in the spreadsheet that Lucia's provided, there are a lot of community-based services embedded in this. There's fiscal notes, but there are community-based services, including wraparound. So there's an attempt to look at across the continuum, in addition to state service, which is a critical piece of this, is things like wraparound services and home builders, and some of the other services that we're recommending through these bills enhances some of our community-based systems of care. That I think also, because it has to be a public-private partnership, right? It really begins to readdress some of the safety net issues that we heard about early on. So I think some of these bills have some things, not the ombudsman, absolutely, that needed to happen, but that's not going to capture sort of down the river before we get to a ombudsman report. Down the river, when we have the opportunity to do some things in the home through very creative use of wraparound funds that may address some of the safety concerns before they elevate. Home builders, before we're talking about the family at risk of dissolution and the children's leaving the home. So some of the things that you can build in sort of further down the stream before we get to some of these upper level concerns. And those are some of the things if in these bills that we've reviewed and recommend.
That said, Senator Libby, I appreciate the question, and I'm going to have to give it some more thought as to how best to ask that on a quarterly basis or get regular reports about that. We get monthly reports on the caseworker workload, and there should be a trend down in terms of the number of cases per caseworker as a measure, but that doesn't say what have you done about policy and procedure. So I'm going to look for an opportunity to slot that into a bill that we still have possession of, maybe.
Thank you both for your responses. I hope that as we move forward, that there'll be additional opportunity to incorporate OPEGA's findings and our discussion into legislation to help improve OCFS. I know we've got 4 weeks left of our session, so there's ample time, even though the presiding officers are telling you, committee chairs, to get all your bills out yesterday. There is still time to work. And so I'm looking forward to that next couple of weeks to continue to hash some of these ideas out. I see Representative Millett, followed by Senator DeChambeau.
Thank you, Madam Mr. Chair. And reflecting on the comments by Representative Stover, who has the background in this area, and the timeline that Senator Claxton put together, and his just immediate questions a few minutes ago about budgetary proposals that would address issues of child protection and child safety. I was thinking, we had a meeting this morning where I believe his department or his committee will be reporting to appropriations in person on next Friday at 11 o'clock. I was wondering if it might be possible to have kind of a crosswalk of how you've addressed these various issues, not just budgetarily, but showing the other language issues, such as the wraparound services that might be provided through different bills, so that I'm looking for a kind of a composite, Senator, and I know this is adding to your own workload, but is there some possibility of simply getting, not simply, a bigger picture summary of what's coming out of your committee and the whole area of child welfare and child safety and protection?
I'm thinking about how to do that. I tend to think in terms of a spreadsheet, and I could make a list of the bills that touch, including the budget, and then include columns for the content that each of those touches. Yes, I can spend some time with that this weekend. I'll try and come up with something like that, Representative Note. Thank you.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you both. Senator DeChambeau.
Okay, no. Okay, I guess it doesn't want my face on. So it's something Senator Claxton mentioned that, of course, piqued my curiosity. And I don't think you meant it the way it came out, but that you've noticed that the numbers of families or children on caseloads have gone down. I guess I'm going to call someone in DHS. I have no idea how they get assigned. Having been a caseworker in a prison, it's not so much, we've done those things where everybody has 60 on their caseload. You need a format to be able to determine intensity. And I think we all know that one caseworker could have 20 on their caseload. And that's just as difficult as if you had 10. I mean, it goes by intensity. And I don't know if DHS has a schedule or how they determine caseloads. So that's my own personal feeling. I know a lot of people just say there's 100, I've got 5 caseworkers, they each have 20. That's not the way I hope it's going. So I want to bring that up, but I think I can find the answer myself if someone doesn't know what it is. Thank you.
HR and DAFs might be helpful too, because they might well be responsible for that. But I think you should start with HHS, and I can start with Molly and see if I can get you an answer for that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Claxton, just to follow up on Representative Millett's request, putting on my AFA hat now, if you could make sure that that spreadsheet also includes, to the extent that you know it, if there is a cost involved, the fiscal note, et cetera, so that we could just have that information all together. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Senator Claxton, I feel like I want to wrap up the discussion, so you're not tasked with any more homework assignments this weekend.
One of these days, I'm going to come out of a committee with less to do, not more, but that's still a dream. But these are all good questions, and I respect the work that you've done, and I'm pleased to be part of trying to address these concerns.
I want to speak on behalf of the committee and echo those sentiments. It's been a pleasure to work with you and your committee as well. It feels like we've taken a couple steps ahead, maybe the occasional step backwards, but I think most people would say we're making some progress. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure thing. I want to be clear that I was just making a friendly joke. If any members do have any additional comments or questions, please feel comfortable in raising them now.
I will say, I hope Charlie feels better soon.
Thank you. Seeing none, we are still in work session, and one action item we can take is a simple endorsement of the first OPEGA report on OCFS. And just as a reminder, endorsement is unique to GOC. We say that the work of OPEGA is credible, it's factual, it's unbiased. We may have a disagreement on a policy that's being discussed, but an endorsement vote is not the place to register that policy view. It's really looking at the office's work and ensuring they're doing their work appropriately. So this does not mean we are at the end of the OCFS work by any stretch, but we're just sort of going through our checklist. So if the committee's ready, a vote to endorse the first OPEGA report would be in order. Senator Bailey?
Again, just my process question, Mr. Chair. So is it an option to endorse as amended?
I think we were, I think we asked Lucia to investigate. She's got her hands up. Maybe she was doing some crack investigating while we were talking.
I've done a little bit. This is not something that we've found in the history of the reports. I will say this is the OPEGA report. And so I think the GOC, I think we would need some more time to think through this question of amending the report. It clearly can be there clearly will be a record of the committee's comments about those data tables. The data tables are available on the OPEGA website and can be linked as, tables related to that report, and will be attached to the meeting summary. Whether the committee formally, I would still need to do some more work on this process of potentially amending the report to add tables that we provided as a follow-up. But we can certainly make those tables readily available with the materials. So it's just not it's not a practice that has been common.
So to clarify, you can though somehow link them. You can link the tables to the report. Did I hear you say that?
I think we can associate them with the report on, for instance, like on the website. But they wouldn't be incorporated into the final report document.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what you mean by we can associate them. I don't know what that means.
Well, we're still figuring out how we would do it exactly, because this is new territory. So I apologize for being vague, but I think our thought was that where the OPEGA report is on the website, for instance, sometimes we also have a link to an executive summary. So we could have a link to additional, tables that were requested by the GOC or something like that. And again, I don't want to commit definitively to the exact mechanism, but I think that would be the preferable way, rather than incorporating it into the report document, which is already finalized and published and so forth.
Okay, thank you. I mean, your assurance that you will somehow connect them is sufficient for me. Thank you.
Okay, so we know we can include them on the website as material associated with this project, but what I'm hearing is the GOC amending the work product of OPEGA is not something that's been done in the past, and that's the difference.
I would need to do additional research to confirm exactly the full history, but it's not in our common knowledge. It's not something.
Nor is it in mine. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to endorse the report.
Thank you. There's been a motion made, seconded by Senator Bailey. Further discussion? Sabrina, can you call the roll?
Works. Senator Libby.
Yes.
Yes. Senator Bailey.
Yes.
Yes. Senator Bennett.
Yes.
Yes. Senator DeChambeau.
Yes.
Yes. Senator Keim. Absent. Senator Timberlake. Absent. Representative Stover.
Yes.
Yes. Representative Arata.
Yes.
Yes. Representative Blyer. Absent. Representative Millet.
Yes.
Yes. Representative O'Neill. Absent. Representative Fay.
Yes.
Yes. 8 yes, 4 absent.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Members will note on agenda item number 4, we did obviously receive a HHS committee report, which is very useful. Lucia, I just want to confirm that the bullet on LD 1834 is also on the public agenda. I can speak to that. Okay, so LD 1834, an act sponsored by Senator Diamond that would require OPEGA and GOC to conduct certain activities. The co-chairs and staff had thought we may want to have a discussion on whether the OPEGA and our committee should be obligated in statute to conduct certain activities. My understanding that bill has been voted ought not to pass. So our discussion here is sort of moot at this point. So if there's no objection, we can proceed with the director's report. Okay, Lucia, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you very much. So quickly, in terms of project status updates, I think we're in the thick of all the projects right now. And so we just had the RETC research expense tax credit presentation. That'll be followed up with a public hearing and then a work session on that. So that report is wrapping up. On the tax front, staff are, as that went down, starting to do some very preliminary work on the tax expenditures that are next up, including tax benefit for media production companies and a deduction for contributions to capital construction funds for the maintenance or replacement of fishing vessels. And on the Child Protective Services front, you just had your work session on the information brief, and staff are working hard to finalize the first formal evaluation report to be presented to the GOC in 2 weeks on March 25th. And the other item that I wanted to note was just that you've been getting a flurry in various forms and from various folks of memos from policy committees related to their reviews of quasi-independent state entities. So a number of years ago, it did involve the GOC statute was enacted requiring certain quasi-independent agencies or entities such as authorities to submit reports annually to be reviewed by policy committees every 2 years regarding their procurement procedures and certain other elements of their agency sort of financial means. And so the committees are in doing those reviews in the second session as prescribed by statute, and there's no action required of the GOC, but the committees are required to submit memos on their reports to you so that if there are concerns or issues that they identify, that'll be brought to your attention. So you have received those reports from a handful of committees. I think I've seen 5 of 7 committees that have them on schedule have submitted those memos, and they have all been finding haven't raised any issues in the ones that have come through so far. So I just wanted to sort of let you know what those are as they keep popping up, and we can put them on the agenda if anything does come up as an issue. Those would be my updates for today.
Great. Thank you, Lucia. Questions or comments from committee? Seeing none. Our next meeting is 2 weeks from today. That will be the meeting where we receive the second OPEGA report on Child Protective Services. I hope committee members understand we're in a transition period of fully remote meetings, some committees meeting in a hybrid format, of course, session happening in person. So when we get more clarity on meeting format, we'll be in communication with the membership. I think at this time we're planning for a remote meeting, but we're open to an alternative if that's made available to our committee room. We'll also have our public comment on the R&D report at the next meeting as well. So with that, are there final comments or questions before an adjournment motion is made? It's Friday afternoon. Senator Bennett, do you have a motion?
I move we adjourn.
Excellent. Is there a second? seconded by multiple people. Representative Fay, I saw. All in favor? Great. We're adjourned. Thank you all very much. Hope you have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Anybody want to come to criminal justice?